and basically solidify and push forward in a very energized way the coalition that already de facto exists, as we all saw during the attack. There's already a coalition against Iran, an axis that works against it. Move it along diplomatically and formally, move to normalization with Saudi Arabia, which will change the whole dynamic of the region. And that, I think, would be a very painful response for Iran, because I think, in a way, that's what Iran fears most.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your global pit stop for the latest news and headlines from the United States and around the world. I'm Eric Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We'll get you a roundup of all the day's top stories, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. China sends fighter jets to monitor and warn a U.S. Navy patrol aircraft that flew over the Taiwan Strait. The mission took place just hours after a call between the Chinese and U.S. defense chiefs. Solomon Islands will hold elections in which the incumbent prime minister is calling for the Pacific Island nation to embrace China. The polls could have consequences for the entire South Pacific. German prosecutors charge a sixth suspect in a far-right plot to kidnap the health minister and overthrow the government in protest against COVID-19 restrictions. Jailed Myanmar democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi moved from prison to house arrest. The Nobel laureate is serving a 27-year sentence for a host of criminal convictions by the junta-led courts. And the desert city of Dubai is experiencing massive flooding as the UAE receives its highest rainfall in 75 years. Significant disruptions reported at the international airport. We begin with the latest updates from the Middle East. Tehran has issued yet another warning to Israel as tensions continue to simmer between the regional foes. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi has warned that the smallest action against Tehran's interests would be met with a severe, extensive, and painful response. Raisi reiterated that Iran's recent missile and drone strike was in self-defense, saying that the operation targeted Israeli bases that were used to carry out the strike in Syria. Iran says a retaliation against any possible Israeli move would come in a matter of seconds, not hours.
If the Zionist regime makes the slightest move to violate our territory and harm the national interests of the Islamic Republic, they must understand that they will face a severe and heavy response. The plan of action for True Promise was a limited operation. It was not a comprehensive and extensive plan. Had it been a much larger action, then the supporters of the Zionist regime would have seen that nothing would have remained of the Zionist regime. But it was decided that this attack should be a first of limited scope. 2, that it should be a response as punishment for the Zionist regime. And 3rd, the targets should be those same places that were used to attack the interests of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
If for any reason the Zionist regime makes the slightest malevolent move against our homeland, our individuals or our interests, it will definitely face a resolute and hard response. As I said, there will be not a 12-13 day gap between a Zionist regime move and Iran's powerful response anymore. The Zionists must now reckon in seconds, not hours.
Over the weekend, Iran launched its first ever direct attack on Israel with over 300 missiles and drones. Tehran says the attack was in response to the April 1st strike on its embassy in Damascus. The strike was a paradigm shift after years of a shadow proxy war. The Israeli military also displayed what it said was a part of an Iranian ballistic missile which was retrieved from the Dead Sea after the attack.
We will respond the way that we will choose at the time that we will choose. We don't just have offensive capabilities who were proven on Saturday night. We have very good. We don't just have defensive capabilities who were proven on Saturday night. We have offensive capabilities, and we will know what to do and when to do and how to do.
It's also the fact that Iran, throughout the course of the years, has been very, very active in our region, but they've been behind the scenes, at backstage. On Saturday night, they came to the front stage, together with their proxies, with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, with Hamas, and operating from Iraq. They have encircled Israel in a ring of fire. That's unacceptable. We need to make sure that they can't be successful in their diabolical intentions.
Israel's war cabinet has concluded a fifth meeting to discuss their response to the attack. In attendance were 3 members of the war cabinet, which includes Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Netanyahu's political rival Benny Gantz. Mossad Chief David Barnea and Army Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi were also in attendance.
Iran will not be able to implement a different equation of deterrence against the state of Israel. The Israeli Air Force planes are operating everywhere. The skies of the Middle East are open. Any enemy that will fight against us, we will know how to hit them wherever they are.
Now, the cabinet is asking Netanyahu to avoid triggering a regional war, as relations between the Israeli Prime Minister and the Biden administration is already strained over Gaza. Meanwhile, Israeli allies, the United States and the EU, are looking at imposing further sanctions on Tehran. In the coming days, the Biden administration will impose sanctions targeting Iran's missile and drone program. Entities supporting Iran's IRGC and its defense ministry could also face sanctions as well.
It is an ongoing process of trying to keep tensions in the region, to reduce tensions in the region and try to maintain as much calm as possible, knowing that there is an ongoing conflict that obviously exacerbates tensions in Israel and around the region.
We will increase our outreach with the key partners in the region, and some member states propose the adoption of expand the restrictive measures against Iran. Adopting an expansion of restrictive measures against Iran. I will send to the External Action Service the request to start the necessary work related to these sanctions.
Now, the United States will also restrict the movement of the Iranian foreign minister and his delegation as they visit New York on Thursday to join a United Nations debate on Palestine. But like Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also feeling the squeeze. Or is he? While international pressure is mounting for Israel to stand down, it is quite clear that a military response will leave the Israeli leader even more isolated. Perhaps the larger question is, does Netanyahu even care? And not just Israel, but Ukraine too is also in a very tough spot. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that a lack of air defenses has made it impossible to thwart waves of Russian missile attacks. He added that the Ukraine ran out of missiles while defending the largest power plant in the capital region. President Zelensky said, quote, "We had 0 missiles. We ran out of missiles. We could not defend Trypillia." The Trypillia power plant was attacked last month, which left hundreds of thousands in Ukraine without electricity. The Trypillia thermal plant is located just south of Kyiv and generates electricity for almost 3 million Ukrainians. Now it's responsible for providing electricity to all of Kyiv and the neighboring cities of Zhytomyr and Cherkasy. President Zelensky says that Russia fired 11 missiles at the power plant, out of which only 7 were in fact intercepted because the Ukrainian battery had exhausted all its missiles. The Ukrainian leader questioned Western powers, particularly the United States, as military aid for Kyiv has come to a complete halt. President Zelensky said that the political deadlock in Congress by the House Republicans was pure politics. Additionally, he also criticized NATO members for rushing to the aid of Israel when it was attacked by Iran. President Zelensky's government says Israel is enjoying NATO's protection without being a NATO member, while the same rules do not apply for Ukraine.
And everything we are asking from partners, even if you cannot act the way you act in Israel, give us what we need, and we will do the rest of the job.
As the war drags on, Vladimir Putin has pledged to strike more of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, forcing Kyiv to direct its scarce military defenses from the front lines to central regions. Ukraine is in dire need of more weapons as the United States and Europe slow down deliveries of military aid.
We urgently require additional Patriot and other modern air defense systems, weapons and ammunition. I take this opportunity to once again urge all of our partners to take extraordinary and bold steps. This war cannot and must not be normalized. Ukrainian air defense is now protecting not only Ukrainian skies from Russian air terror, it also shields neighboring Moldova, Romania and Poland from the immediate threat of missile and drone entering their airspace.
Now, NATO members say they are doing their best to send more defense systems to Ukraine.
We are discussing with others how we can be helpful in making sure that more Patriots are made available, because air defense is important for defending your economy, defending your energy system, defending your cities and your population, but also to keeping up the morale. You will not win the war with air defenses, but it's a very important prerequisite.
Meanwhile, in the United States, House Speaker Mike Johnson has promised that the House of Representatives will vote on the bill for sending $60 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine this coming Friday.
But we will vote on each of these measures separately in 4 different pieces. We will vote on the Israel aid, on the aid to Ukraine, on the aid to the Indo-Pacific, and then another measure that has our national security priorities included, and that has some of the things with regard to the loan lease option and the Repo Act and some other sanctions on Iran and other measures that we've been talking about here for quite some time.
President Zelensky says that Ukraine will in fact lose the war to Russia if the United States fails to approve more military aid. Meanwhile, Putin's troops have changed strategy as they go after Ukraine's energy systems, a tactical shift from the conventional fighting which appears to be severely testing Ukraine's resolve. And now moving to the race for the White House, while President Joe Biden is aggressively spending his campaign money, his Republican opponent Donald Trump is languishing in a New York courtroom. Driven by massive ad buys, the Biden campaign spending quadrupled in March. The president's campaign spent over $29 million last month. On Tuesday, while Joe Biden made a campaign trip to his birthplace, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump managed to take some time out from the Manhattan court proceedings for a mini campaign stop in New York. Our next report gets you the latest on all the political barbs and legal wranglings taking place in the race for the White House.
As the 2024 race to the White House picks up pace, President Joe Biden's re-election campaign has its strategy clear. Raise more cash, and spend it faster. In recent weeks, President Joe Biden has aimed to show himself off as a fundraising juggernaut, and rightly so. His campaign has made significant early investments, leaving his Republican opponent Donald Trump's campaign scrambling to catch up. There has also been aggressive spending of campaign money. In March, the Biden campaign spent $29.2 million. This is 4 times the amount spent in the previous month, where the Biden campaign dropped about $6.3 million. The president's campaign also managed to make further additions to its cash total. It received $43.8 million in new contributions. More than half of this came through joint fundraising committees. The Biden campaign ended March with $85 million cash on hand. On Tuesday, Joe Biden made a campaign trip to his birthplace in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He also visited his childhood home in the former mining town. In Pennsylvania, Biden unleashed a blistering attack on Trump.
Folks, he's coming for your money, your health care, and your Social Security. And we're not going to let it happen. Can't let it happen. Listen to what he says. He says, quote, "I'll be dictator on day one." Quote, "I am your retribution." He promises, quote, "a bloodbath if he loses." This guy denies January 6th. Listen to what he says, because you know he means it.
While he made no reference to Trump's hush money trial in New York, Biden said the November vote was a battle between Scranton values and Mar-a-Lago values.
You know, people like Donald Trump learned very different lessons. He learned the best way to get rich is inherited. Not a bad way. He learned that paying taxes was something people who work for a living did, not him. He learned that telling people you're fired was something to laugh about. He looked at the economy from Mar-a-Lago, where he and his rich friends embraced the failed trickle-down policies that have failed working families for more than 40 years. Scranton values or Mar-a-Lago values. These are the competing visions for our economy, and they raise questions of fundamental fairness to the heart of this campaign.
There were also some Palestinian flags flying. As protests continue against Biden's support of Israel's war in Gaza. As President Biden extended his campaign blitz, the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, languished in court. Trump's advisors have conceded they have less money than Biden, but they insist they have enough to compete. However, Trump's financial burden from his legal fights is also mounting. On Tuesday, 7 jurors, 4 men and 3 women, were placed on the panel that will decide Trump's guilt or innocence in the New York hush money case. Donald Trump's courtroom conduct once again got him in hot water with the judge. Judge Merkin warned the Republican presidential hopeful against intimidating jurors. This after Trump's lawyers dug through prospective jurors' social media posts, trying to root out those with an anti-Trump bias from getting on the jury.
We are going to continue our fight against this judge. We think he's totally conflicted. He's a conflicted judge. As you know, we're in appeal. I don't think there has ever been a judge more conflicted than this one. He's rushing this trial, and he's doing as much as he can for the Democrats. This is a Biden-inspired witch hunt, and it should end very quickly.
While in New York, the former president did manage to take some time out for a campaign stop. From the Manhattan courtroom, Trump arrived at a Harlem bodega where hundreds had gathered.
We're going to come into New York. We're making a big play for New York. Other cities too, but this city, I love this city. And it's gone so bad in the last 4 years, and we're going to straighten New York out. So running for president, we're putting a big hit on New York.
For now, Trump will have to shuffle between the courtroom and campaigns. As the jury selection resumes on Thursday with a new panel of 96 prospective jurors. Earlier, there had been speculation that the jury selection could take weeks. But Judge Juan Merkin says he was hopeful opening arguments could begin as early as Monday.
And now shifting focus to South America, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has ordered the closure of his country's embassy and consulates in Ecuador. Maduro says he is cutting ties with Ecuador after the raid on the Mexican embassy in Quito. Ecuador raided the Mexican embassy to detain former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass earlier this month. Ecuador's police entered Mexico's embassy forcefully to make the arrest. Now, this is in fact a violation of international law and an infringement on Mexico's sovereignty. Quito said the former vice president was arrested while trying to evade corruption charges by seeking political asylum in Mexico. After the incident, Mexico cut all diplomatic relations with Ecuador and dragged Quito to the International Court of Justice. Now Venezuela has decided to also cut all diplomatic ties with Ecuador in solidarity with Mexico.
I announced that Venezuela has ordered the closure of her embassy in Ecuador and consulate in Quito, and to immediately close the consulate of Guayaquil and the immediate return of the diplomatic staff in Venezuela. We have a business manager, Professor Pedro Sassone, and from here I order to prepare everything from the closure and the comeback until the international law is re-established in Ecuador.
In Ecuador? Now, Maduro said that he fully supports Mexico's request to have Ecuador removed from the United Nations. And the Venezuelan leader believes that Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has not faced the true consequences for his actions against a sovereign state.
President Daniel Noboa should have had to appear in front of the whole Latin America and the Caribbean and take responsibility in front of Ecuador, in front of Latin America, in front of the Caribbean, and in front of the world. But he hasn't faced the consequences. I can say from Venezuela, President Daniel Noboa has hidden, and the people of Ecuador must know why President Daniel Noboa hasn't faced the consequences. And he is not taking responsibility for his actions.
Meanwhile, Ecuador's President Noboa has accused Mexico of violating international treaties by granting asylum to the former Vice President Jorge Glass. Quito says that the former vice president was not a political refugee, but in fact a criminal who had been convicted of very serious crimes. Now Maduro's decision to cut ties with Quito has in fact stranded thousands of Venezuelans in Ecuador as the diplomatic war continues to escalate.
They should consider reopening soon so we can ask for our paperwork in order to be legally in here.
The uncertainty reigning over the Venezuelan population is catastrophic. First, they imposed the world's most expensive passport. Now, it's not only expensive, but we must get it in other countries as a result of this severance of diplomatic relations with Ecuador.
As more nations take action against Ecuador for violating Mexico's sovereignty, Quito is facing growing diplomatic isolation. And finally, the climate crisis continues to take a toll on coral reefs. Australia's Great Barrier Reef is suffering from one of the most severe bleaching events on record. Scientists say around 73% of the coral reef has turned ghostly white. The rising ocean temperatures may even lead to the death of these corals. So what in fact is coral bleaching, and how is it affecting the Great Barrier Reef? Our next report explains.
Australia's world-famous Great Barrier Reef is struggling to survive. It's suffering from one of the most severe mass bleaching events on record. In fact, scientists say coral reefs across the world are on the verge of death. But what exactly is coral bleaching? Well, it's a process where corals lose their color and turn white. These marine organisms break up with the algae that give them most of their food and color. The algae live in their tissues to absorb sunlight and nutrients to stay alive. So when a coral expels the algae, its white skeleton can be seen through its translucent flesh. This gives the coral a bleached appearance. These white corals aren't instantly dead. Instead, most of the time they are starving to death. This brings us to the next question. Do all bleached corals die? The answer is no. Corals can survive a bleaching event if the surrounding waters cool and the algae return. It could take them at least 10 to 15 years to make a full recovery. However, scientists have warned that corals have faced harsher and higher temperatures this year. Now, coming back to the Great Barrier Reef. The Australian government says about 73% of the coral cover has bleached. Scientists say this is the fifth mass bleaching event on the World Heritage Site in the last 8 years. They believe that rising ocean temperatures are putting corals under extreme stress.
So the summer of 2024 is now the fifth mass bleaching event to happen on the Great Barrier Reef since 2016. Basically what's happened this summer is that we now have a record number of individual reefs on the Great Barrier Reef exposed to the most prolonged and intense levels of heat stress since records started to be kept from the satellite record back to 1985.
The Great Barrier Reef is the world's largest living structure that is spread across over 344,000 square kilometers. It's home to more than 600 types of coral and more than 1,600 species of fish. The news from the Great Barrier Reef comes at a time when corals around the world are turning bone white. On Monday, the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration confirmed that the world's 4th mass bleaching event is underway.
Significant severe coral bleaching has been reported in at least 54 countries and territories around the globe since February 2023. So it's spatially extensive, occurring, again, in all ocean basins across multiple countries.
This will not only affect the health of oceans, but also the livelihoods of people, food security, and local economies. A quarter of marine life depends on coral reefs for food and shelter. Every year, reefs provide about $2.7 trillion in goods and services. They also help people living in coastal areas by forming a protective barrier against storms and large waves. So, how can we save corals? Experts say cutting greenhouse gas emissions is the first step in preventing coral bleaching. Additionally, cleanup programs to remove litter from the reefs would reduce further stress. As for the Great Barrier Reef, the Australian government has already invested about $3.2 billion to protect the threatened species.
That's all we have time for today. We certainly thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks again for watching. From impeachments to inaugurations,